Next, Amy Goodman here is going to bring up a story, a narrative, and her opinion on the Dakota Access Pipeline.
The weekend we were there, the Native Americans didn't expect the Dakota Access Pipeline to be being excavated because it was a holiday weekend. We were following a group of Native Americans to that sacred burial land. They were going to plant Native flags there. And that's when they saw the bulldozers operating at full tilt. They were shocked. The bulldozers were operating just at the place they had mapped out. And they believed that once they made the map and the judge gave it to the Dakota Access Pipeline, that they leapfrogged over where they were excavating, moved forward to excavate this land, so that when the judge ruled the next week, the facts on the ground would have been changed. It's a moot point. And they were horrified. And it started with women, and a woman with her child, and they went up on the property and they stood in front of these massive boulders. This is scary, unbelievably brave. You might not think that if I just said bulldozers. These machines are not small. Also that week, President Obama was in Asia, his historic trip to Laos, first time. And at the end of that trip, he held a democracy forum for young Asian students, and they came from all over Asia. And at the end of this forum, a young woman from Malaysia raised her hand and said, President Obama, what about the Dakota Access Pipeline? I mean, not one American journalist had asked President Obama about this publicly. And here's this young woman who'd come to learn about democracy from the President of the United States. And she said, what about DAPL?
If that doesn't sound like Tiananmen Square to you, I don't know what does. Yeah, that is peak of authoritarianism happening within our own country. And as Amy Goodman alluded to, this is really important because it's great to criticize other countries for their lack of democracy. I do all the time, including our enemies. But it only is nuanced and objective if we do the same treatment for ourselves. So we can criticize, for example, the Democratic Republic of the Congo for having conflicts over minerals, over natural resources. They have the conflict mineral crisis, of course, that's killing thousands of people. But we're fighting conflicts over natural resources, and the aggressor is our own government here in the United States. Similarly, we can criticize the authoritarian aspects of Iran, which is surely an imperfect country. But it's really hypocritical that we call them the world's largest state sponsor of terror, when we fund and arm, and one of our closest allies is the actual state sponsor of terror. I mean, which is of course Saudi Arabia. So 94% of terror worldwide is Wahhabi terror. And Iran is not a Wahhabi state. It is actually a Shia state, whereas Saudi Arabia is a Wahhabi state. And in fact, by arming the Syrian rebels directly and through Saudi Arabia, we are inadvertently, or possibly inadvertently, arming terrorists. Some reports have placed it up to as high as 60% of the Syrian rebels are terrorists, be it allegiance to al-Nusra, ISIS, or a different group that is labeled jihadist, Wahhabi group. Whereas just recently, just yesterday, Iran bombed ISIS because they have different ideologies. ISIS is, of course, Sunni, whereas Iran is Shia, and they have disputing ideologies. So are you going to say that the group that has a different opinion, Iran, that has a different opinion from 94% of all terror, which is Wahhabi terror, is a bigger state sponsor of terror than Saudi Arabia, which arms that 94% of all terror, which is Wahhabi, and is like the leading source of that and the birthplace of that Wahhabi terror? So yeah, we should take a look in the mirror, and also for lack of democracy. We criticize North Korea all the time, and rightfully so. We should criticize them for their authoritarian aspects. But at the same time, we have to recognize that we're not a very democratic country. We have a low score, relatively, compared to other Western countries on the democracy index. And also, there was actually a Princeton study that analyzed the least popular bills among American popular opinion and the most popular bills among American popular opinion. And what they found is that among all across the spectrum of most hated and most loved bills, they all had a 30% chance of passing. In other words, it didn't matter what the American public opinion was in terms of legislation, in terms of the chance of representatives voting for something. In other words, we don't really have much of a voice, and that's kind of the antithesis of democracy, isn't it? Yeah, and meanwhile, of course, the line for the 1% of the corporations was different. The more they supported a bill, of course, the higher the chance it has of passing. That's more of a corporatocracy or plutocracy as compared to a democracy. So we should criticize other countries, don't get me wrong, but as Amy Goodman said, we should also look in the mirror, like that girl from Laos. Also, I wanted to bring up, since the issue of Native Americans' rights was brought up in terms of the Dakota Access Pipeline, this interesting 538 study that I found, which found that, which basically measured the death rates of every county in America, and found that 3 of the 4 counties in America with the highest mortality rates are in the Dakotas. So number 1 is Union County in Florida. Number 2 is Buffalo County, South Dakota. Number 3 is Oglala Lakota in South Dakota. And number 4 is Sioux in North Dakota. And, you know, when you look at those, and you could tell by the names, first of all, but I mean, if you look into those, it's primarily Native American reservations. It's not like these counties are filled with white people. These are Native American reservations. So Native Americans are some of the worst off, are actually probably the worst off minority in America. When you look at it, they have the highest poverty rate, they have the highest suicide rate, and as you just see, they have what looks to be the highest mortality rate. And that's why the Dakota Access Pipeline is so disastrous. Not only does it destroy the water that they have there, not only does it contribute more to climate change because we're entrenching ourselves into a system and economy of oil, but to a minority group that we've wronged for so many years, the Native Americans, we are doing the worst possible thing to them without their permission. And again, as I just pointed out with the mortality rates, they are the most wronged, or at least one of the most wronged, it's no competition, but one of the most wronged minorities in the United States. And with the Dakota Access Pipeline, we're disgustingly wronging them once again.